W12, and I hope that you're thinking in the present and that you're experiencing and you are in process. Let me give you a couple of small, quick, interesting examples to sort of illustrate the difference between thinking and being in process. What I would like for you to do right now is just simply fake a yawn and there, and see what happens. Now, fake the yawn, and what you're going to find out is that there's a place where the yawn takes over, and you just yawn. And that place, that very subtle place of where you're trying to yawn and it takes over, that's the place we want to get to. That's the underlying structure. Let me give you a couple of other examples. What I would like for you to do right now, and I'm going to have to say this without any preview or pretense, what I want you to do is to notice something. And I want you to concentrate all your attention and notice your breathing. Okay? Now, if you're like most people, what you did is one of two things. You either held your breath and said, what am I supposed to do here? What you're doing is you're looking for old categories. You're not using the new information. Or what most people do is when you're asked to notice your breathing, we take a deep breath. That's not what we ask at all. We simply ask to notice the breathing, not to change anything, but it's very difficult because our left hemisphere and our old way of living and our old way of surviving is to look for the right categories. This is what we're taught in school. We're taught how to solve problems. We're not taught how to create things. We're not taught how to create profits, for example. Let me give you a couple more examples. In our country today, the president of this country is trying to solve the deficit problem. It'll never happen because there's some characteristics, some psychological characteristics about problem solving that we're going to address in a few moments that make it impossible for this to happen. Our Justice Department is trying to solve the problem of crime, so we build a bunch of new jails. It's not going to happen. Our medical profession is trying to solve the problem of disease. It's not going to happen because when you solve a problem, you don't have anything except a solved problem. And when we look at the right and left hemisphere, this is going to become very, very important. Let me give you one more example of something to do. I want you to do something that you've probably done, at least 100 or 200 times already today, something you do very naturally. You couldn't live for very long if you didn't have this ability, but I want you to try to do something, and I want you to notice how you get in your own way when you try to do it. What I'd like for you to do right now, without any preparation, is I want you to swallow 5 times as fast as you can. Okay? Go. Keep going, fast as you can, swallow, swallow, swallow. Now, what's happening is you're finding that each time you try to swallow, it gets more and more difficult because you're using the wrong part of your brain. And let's talk about these parts of the brain. So let's go over here and let's look at this space 1, which is our left hemisphere here. And one of the jobs of the left hemisphere is to solve problems. Now, another job of the left hemisphere, it has 2 main functions, the left hemisphere. One is to do what we call habituate behavior. For example, when you're learning to ride a bicycle, it's very, very difficult. I mean, you have to do a lot of things and think about a lot of things. Then after a while, you kind of get the hang of it. And then you've got it. It becomes habituated, it becomes in your gut, and it may be 20 years since you've ridden a bicycle, but you can get back on that bicycle and ride it immediately. That's one purpose of the left hemisphere. And that's what you've been working with these 12 weeks with these tapes and with the manuals. And when you work with these, you're habituating behavior. So we take the part, how we trade bit by bit, and then we put it back together. The second problem, or the second purpose of the left hemisphere, is to solve problems. That's this one. Now, inherent in solving problems, what we're taught, and this is what we're taught in school, this is right and wrong, you solve this problem, you get an A or you get an F or whatever, inherent in any kind of this sort of behavior is a reward-punishment situation. You get a good grade, you get a bad grade. You do this or you lose your job kind of deal. Now, that always, always breeds dissatisfaction. For example, let's say that you're a salesperson and you win the sales contest. You get to go to Hawaii. Then the first question comes up, well, where do we go next year? We're going to Shanghai, we're going to Kuala Lumpur, or we've got to do something better. This happens at every level. Reward breeds dissatisfaction. Let's say that you're just a beginning trader and you make $1,000 in the market today. And this is, let's assume that this is Monday. Then what we say is, gee, if I can make $1,000 every day, then by Friday I have $5,000, and then maybe next week I can make $2,000 a day. This is the way it goes. And let me show you how this inherent in this whole activity is it breeds dissatisfaction. There's another axiom in psychology that's appropriate here too, and that is that once you start to become successful, you tend to quit doing the very thing that made you successful in the first place. Let's take an example. Let's say that this is you and you're 200 pounds overweight. Now, you're very uncomfortable, kids are laughing at you, the clothes don't fit right, and this is your ideal weight over here. And you decide to go on a weight loss program. And you lose 20 pounds. Well, they say, now you're only 180 pounds overweight. The clothes don't fit quite as badly as they did. You feel better than you did. And you start losing motivation. Now, what they will tell you is that that first 10 pounds is the easiest because that's water retention. The last 10 pounds is the hardest, the most difficult. Not really true. It's true because it's psychological. Because if you're only 20 pounds overweight, that's not too bad. You don't stand out that much. So as you start to solve the problem, whether you're a company, a corporation, or an individual, you tend to quit doing the very things that made you successful in the first place. Now, there's an underlying structure here that's even more vicious, and that is, what if you do solve your problems? What's this left hemisphere, this Joe Gremlin, going to do? Because his job in life is to solve problems. Now, if you solve all your problems, this guy's going to be out of a job. So if you start to solve the problem, what's he going to do? Think about that for a moment. The thing he's obviously going to do is to create more problems. I read a couple of months ago a very, very interesting statement about lotto winners. They did a research on people who won the lotto, people who win millions of dollars, who've never had money, who've struggled, who've worked hard, and now all of their problems are solved. And guess what? It takes them, these are people who take their lotto winnings in a lump sum, not the ones who take it over 20 years. It takes an average of just over 3 years for them to get back where they were. In 3 years' time, they had enough money to solve their whole life problems, but the average is 3 years they've spent all of that money on frivolous kind of things. Why? Because their problem solver wouldn't let them solve the problems. Because if the problems are solved, the problem solver's out of a job, and he, Joe Grimman, wants a job. So we have to take care of this. So the categories then, that creates how we solve the problem, and our categories are another word for our belief system. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about this. Categories come at what psychologists call an optimal learning period. On public TV, and maybe you've seen this before, it's been on there several times, there is a duck, and I do not remember the name of the duck, but whatever this duck's name is, on the first thing that he sees on the second day of life, let's make this clear, he's hatched today. The first thing he sees when he wakes up in the morning is his mother. It doesn't matter whether it's his mother or another duck or a male duck or an airplane or a pickup truck or whatever it is. On public TV, there's a very interesting episode where this one guy had these ducks, he hatched them, and he put them under the wing of an ultralight airplane. So when they woke up the next morning, they thought the ultralight airplane was a mother. So now this guy takes off and all the ducks follow him. In fact, he had to fly south because they didn't know how to migrate. They had no mother to follow. So he had to fly his ultralight south to make sure they were able to survive the winter. These are optimal learning periods. We have the same thing. For example, let's take a newborn baby. A newborn baby, the first dimension of personality in a newborn baby is optimism, pessimism. Now, there's an interesting statistic here. About 90% of us are born pessimistic. Only about 10% of us are born optimistic. The difference between the two is an optimist thinks they are valued because of who they are, and a pessimist thinks they're valued because of what they do. You can see this in a newborn baby. In fact, before a baby's born, I have a friend who is pregnant at the moment, and she says that this particular kid is going to be a soccer player because he's kicking a lot more than the first baby was. So this optimism, pessimism, he's either a good baby or he's maybe got the colic or whatever. But this affects our entire life. And only 10% of us are born over here, 90% are born over here. As we grow up, and when we're born, we think we know everything. We see the world in a global fashion. We really don't see ourselves as a baby in a cradle, and that's mommy up there. We see her as an extension of ourselves. As we grow up, as we get a little older and a little older, it becomes apparent that we can't really know and experience everything ourselves. We have to take someone else's word about something. And that usually happens, this has nothing to do with birthdays, but has to do with maturity, but somewhere between maybe 4 and 6 years old, this person over here goes through a stage called a satellizing stage. And that means they start satellizing, just as a rocket ship will satellize around the Earth, a satellite, around some significant other. Maybe a parent, maybe an older brother, maybe a friend or whatever. But these are people who they are willing to take their word for how things go. Over here, this person who sees himself as a means, while the optimist sees himself as an end, this person does not satellize because basically he does not trust the world. And what happens is that he forms some categories that are different from this optimist. He cannot satellize. Now, the next thing that happens, the next big deal comes at puberty. And at puberty, we have a explosion of chemicals. Either in guys we call it the testosterone explosion. What happens here, this guy has satellized, or this person has satellized, and now they go off and they become a revolutionary. Now, one of the problems, in my opinion, of our country, or the world at this point, is that we don't distinguish between a revolutionary and a rebel. This person does not desatellize. It does not go off because it can't. It never satellized in the first place. It never satellized because it did not trust itself or the world. But it has the same amount of energy that this open-minded person or this optimist person over here has. So what this turns out to be is a rebel. Now, a rebel has the same amount of energy, but instead of using that, a revolutionary will go out here and try to improve society or do something for the world. A rebel is a burn, baby, burn. This is anger. It's anger because it never found anybody it could truly trust, and it doesn't trust the world. Remember what Einstein said. The most important question we can ever ask is the universe a friendly place? And that's basic of what we're talking about right here. So at this point, this produces adults up here, which are two kinds of traders. Now, interestingly, if we start out with 90% down here, we're probably going to end up with around 90% here, around 10% here, and interestingly, about 90% of all traders lose money consistently. Is there a connection between the two? We think so. We sincerely think so. So let's go further now, and let's put this into the adulthood, and how this affects our trading, and how this adults our living. And let's make an oscillator here, and it doesn't matter what we're talking about, but we have plus on one side, we have 0, and we have minus on the other side. This could be how happy we are, how well we trade, how much money we make. It can be any dimension of personality you want, because we are a hologram living in a holographic universe. So the way we trade is the way we live. In fact, there are a lot of very interesting things we could point out, characteristic that we know about you by watching how you trade, or we can watch you perform in life, and we can predict very accurately how you're going to trade in the market. So let's take the 90%ers. These are people who feel joy, who feel sadness, who feel joy, who feel sadness. And to the extent that they can feel joy here, to that same extent, they can feel sadness. Now, these people these are the people who do not believe that the universe is a friendly place. These are people who see themselves as means, that they're valued only if they do certain things, if they perform a certain way. The 10%, their life goes much more like this. They experience joy up here that's unknown to these people. They also experience sadness down here that are unknown to these people. The psychological literature, if you want to look this up, unfortunately they misnamed this. They call these closed-minded people, they call those open-minded people, and I don't like the connotation that goes with that. For example, a closed-minded person has many fewer problems than an open-minded person has. For a closed-minded person, the world is black and white. all abortions are bad. Doesn't matter if the mother's life is in danger or whatever, all abortions are bad. These people also need support. So in trading, they want to know what everybody's thinking. They want to read the newspapers. They want to read every word of the Wall Street Journal or Investors Daily. They look for other information because they need the support. These people up here, this is called a peak experience. Now, let's look at this for just a moment. What happens when you have a peak experience? Now, a peak experience is something that's so out of the ordinary, it happens rarely. It's when you sell the top, buy the bottom, the market goes your way, or whatever. Anytime you have a peak experience, the first thing you want to do is you want to tell somebody about it. Let me tell you about, we live by the wetlands out here. Most of us are a group of wetlands. And about last Thursday night, a UFO came down, and I went up in this UFO, and let me tell you about this. Well, what happens if you have this peak experience and you want to tell somebody about it, the chances of you, the person you're going to tell, the chances are 9 to 1 that they have never experienced that kind of a peak experience. So they don't know what you're talking about. So after a while of beating your head against the wall, then you quit telling people about it. Now, this is important because these are the naturally good traders. These are the people who do not need the reinforcement of a union or a group or being a member of a certain group or being a member of a certain religion or being a member of a certain technical analysis group or whatever. These people are self-sufficient. They are so sufficient that they can let the incoming information analyze itself. These people are category dependent. They have to have the old categories. If it doesn't fit in this category, it's not right. Prejudice of all kind originate here. And being very frank and political, this is one of the reasons why I believe that we will never have an intelligent, open-minded person leading our country. Because to get elected, the things you have to do to get the support of these people, no one would do this. These are the standalone, independent traders that you don't hear a lot about. These are the ones who really make it in the market. These are people who have naturally gotten on this trail. So the question then becomes, let's look at this in another way. Let's assume that this is the optimistic, trusting version, and this is a pessimistic, doesn't trust the world, and let's say that we're all someplace along here, and we want to go in this direction. For whatever reason, we want to approach that to make more money in the market or whatever. We know from psychological research there are two ways to do it. We also know that there's one way that it never seems to work, and that one way that it never seems to work is to go out here by yourself, read a book, get on a desert island, and from reading a book, do it. That's why we have the private tutorials. Another way is that you find a person that you think is further along this way than you, and they become your guru, they become your teacher. That sometimes works, but an even better way is to get a group of like-minded people, this is a leaderless group, whose goal in being together is to move in that direction. That seems to be the most efficient. And that's why that we do the private tutorials. That's why we come together, we trade together, we introduce you to other people who've been here, and form a group that we hope will communicate. To review this, let's take this off of the board, and let's now go over to the television. To review what we've been saying, where do categories originate? And remember that the characteristic of the first force dominance, that's people who dream about things and don't follow through, and we want to make certain amounts of money. We're always in motion. And what that does, it wears you out from trading without getting the desired results of winning. This is the very first. This is the lower left-hand corner of this triangle that we were looking at. It also makes you feel that unless you move fast, you will be overcome by the market. And so that builds up tension and pressure makes us stupid, and we make the wrong decisions. Another characteristic is that we tend to explode like a nova. We get very excited, and then we fall back into despondency, into the second force black hole. And the characteristics of the second force dominance, when we're in the lower right-hand corner of that triangle, is it checks creation. And it makes, actually it has a positive characteristic because it makes room for new growth and new possibilities. And second forces come from when your desires conflict with reality. Now how we handle that in trading is what we call webometry and the cybernetics of trading. Now tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to spend a good deal of time looking at words and how words affect us. So in reviewing what we've done today, we've looked at where our categories originate. We've looked at why that words are important at this point. We're going to look at that more tomorrow. And we looked at how we develop these categories and how they come from very young, when we were too young to really determine whether they were appropriate or not. So we are really trading from like 2-, 3-year-old categories unless we can get out of the categories and fire Joe Gremlin. And remember that the way to fire Joe Gremlin is to simply notice, and primarily, the most important thing is to be in process, to be in the here and now, to think in the present tense and to be in the present tense. We'll be with you again tomorrow. Enjoy your evening and do your morning pages.